One of my favorite words I've ever heard is an old Latin word, quantuvus. It means as great as you choose. And the first time I ever heard the word, it was shared with me by my good friend Mark Miller, who is joining us today. Mark, just a legendary leader, great thinker, incredible when it comes to him being great. I mean, pushing me to be great. He's just such a fantastic friend. An amazing guy. He was on our show several weeks back. We got to pick his brain a little bit. And so today you're going to get to hear from Mark again as we think about this. But this idea of quantuvus, I love that word, as great as you choose. So how great are you choosing to be right now? How great are you choosing to be? Welcome to Chasing Greatness. This week's episode is gonna be great. But before we get to that, I want to rewind the tape just a couple of weeks. We've been talking these last few weeks about being better together. And as you think about your life, as you think about your money, remember we talked about that. If you hadn't heard that episode, I encourage you to go back. You chasing greatness with your finances and how you're taking care of your stuff. We talked about your friends determining the quality and direction of your life, the people that you have around your life. We talked about your fitness just this last week. That was great. And then tucked in there a couple weeks ago, if you heard that one, I talked about being in an environment at work where you feel like the people around you are helping you be great. And I reminded you, if you've got a place that's draining you and pulling you down, and it may not be the place you should be, so you might want to go back and check that out if you're really struggling at work, to help you really either change your perspective or change your career. Maybe or at least change your job. I'm not sure, but you might want to check out one of those episodes. But thank you so much for being a part of this thing. Thanks also for subscribing, and I know we got a bunch of you watching on YouTube now. Thanks for that. Also, the podcast side continues to grow, and our downloads, we're loving watching those numbers grow, and you're just really helping us. So thank you so much for helping us to chase greatness ourselves. We're trying to have a greater audience, and you're a part of that. And so we really appreciate that. But as we think about this week's episode, again, I want to go back to my friend Mark, who is he's the VP of Leadership Development at a little company called Chick-fil-A. You probably heard of Chick-fil-A. I enjoy their sandwiches. I got a chance to sit in a drive-through line yesterday, and I pulled in thinking this is going to be just a nightmare. It was just packed. I mean, I'd never seen many cars in a line. And 6 minutes later, I'm out with my spicy chicken sandwich. I was pretty fired up about that. And they did a great job doing that. But Mark has been at Chick-fil-A for a long time, over 40 years now, and he is going to share a little bit about that, what it means to be in one company for 40 years. I want to think about that for a second. So when I'm growing up, my dad, he works with Georgia Power. He worked in a utility company for 35 years, one company, his whole career. My mom stayed in a couple of jobs for a long time. I mean, as I think back to my childhood, a lot of people back then would stay in one location for a long time. Now we live in a world where everybody seems like they switch their job every week. And I think there's some things that are beneficial about staying planted in a place for a long time. We did talk about a couple of weeks ago, maybe some of us need to get out of our current location and we need to move on in our vocation. Our location in our vocation needs to change. But for some of us, maybe we need to stay planted in that place for a long time. I'm surrounded here by trees that just continue to grow. And it's amazing how when I moved in here, I think we've been in this place, I don't know, almost 20 years now, 17, 18 years. Some of these trees were really small, and it's just been cool to watch them grow over that time. And for some of us, we're actually not going to reach full height and full capacity if we choose the easy way out and leave. So for some of us, let's don't leave, let's stay. Mark stayed for 40 years. He's going to talk some about that today. I got a great question that we asked him, and I can't wait for you to hear what he said. But then for some of us, I want us to think about the second part of our conversation with Mark today. We only spent about 10 minutes together on this week's conversation with him. We'll have him back in a few weeks for more of that conversation. But the second part today, I asked him about this idea of reinventing continuously. And I'll come back at the end and I'll talk a little bit about that. But just kind of as a setup, I want you to be thinking, are there some places in your life where you need to stay planted, and you stay locked in, but are there also some places in your life where it's time for you to do some things differently? So this conversation with Mark, I think will really spur your thinking there. And again, I'll give you a couple things at the end that you can do. But let's lock into this conversation that I had with my good friend, Mark Miller. talk about the power of being in one company for a long time. That happened a lot more when we were kids. You know, our dads and moms, they're pretty loyal to places. Now people are changing a lot, but sometimes staying in a place, I think, creates resilience. It creates, you know, humility. It creates angst. I mean, there's all kind of things that happen. Talk about how you have benefited from being in one place for a long time. And then on the flip side of that, are there places where you feel like you've been limited by being in one place for 40? I mean, it is okay to change sometimes for people. So you've had some variety in that place. Talk a little bit about a 4-decade career in one place in the year 2021. I mean,
yeah. Let me think what might be helpful here. I mean, you certainly have perspective. Now, you could argue that every employee has perspective, but it's informed by their time in role. And so or time in organization. And so when you've been there 40 years, you've got a different perspective than most. And in my case, the fact that not only was I hired by Truett, but worked with Truett for many years, now that Truett's gone, I feel like I have an opportunity, if not a responsibility, to represent his views and his opinions and others in the same boat as I who worked with Truett. We try to do that. We think he had insight and wisdom that's hard to come by. And so we want to try to keep that alive. And I think
steward that for the future generations.
To steward that for the future generations. Yeah. And so I think that's one of the advantages. You obviously understand the culture. You can build strong support networks. There, as you probably know, your listeners know, there's been research that a lot of men and women who succeed in one organization do not in their next. And the research would indicate it's because they had a support structure, network, and infrastructure that they don't have when they move to the new place. Sometimes we even undervalue it because we don't know, you know, let's say you're a high flyer and you say, oh, I'm going to take this job over here. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but you may be a high flyer in part because of everything that's around you. So I think that's one potential advantage of staying in one place is that you get to build that infrastructure, that network, not just formal, but the informal communications channels. You know, how do you get things done? If you're a new person walking into an organization with, pick a number, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 employees, how do you get things done? Well, we've got about 2,500 corporate employees today, but I was number 16. I can usually figure out where to go to get stuff done. The new person probably can't. So that would be one advantage. But I would say this, I would not have stayed, I don't know how long I would have stayed, but I would not have stayed for 4 decades had the organization not continued to give me opportunities to learn, to grow, and to be challenged. Because you mentioned earlier, I've had trouble holding down a job. That's actually true. I've had several career changes within the organization. Yeah. So yeah, I've been in one place all these years, but when you start a corporate communications group from scratch, I was still in college when I started the corporate. I didn't even know what corporate communications was. Yeah. When you start you
might not even could get a job in that now.
Oh, no, I couldn't.
You started it.
I couldn't.
That's funny.
You know, I started our quality and customer satisfaction group.
Yeah.
I didn't start our training and development group, but I modernized it, came in, and that was the longest stint. I was there over 10 years. That was my longest stint. And so the organization continued to allow me to do new and different things. I led in field operations for about 4 years, working with restaurants and our staff consultants that serve those restaurants. And so the variety is what kept me fully, I would say, fully engaged.
I want to lean on that a little bit. You say one of the fundamental skills you and Ken Blanchard wrote about in The Secret, the SERVE model. Y'all wrote about one of the fundamental skills is the leader is able to reinvent continuously.
Yes.
You're speaking a little bit to that as you talk about it. But that listener that's out there who's feeling like maybe they're over an organization, but they feel stuck, they feel trapped. Talk about the power of reinventing yourself, even in the context of an organization like you've done. I mean, can you help us there?
Yeah, let me another word of context. When we wrote about that and the research that we did that led to our conclusions, we put it in 3 buckets because reinvent continuously, honestly, sounds like a buzzword from the 80s. Now, some of your listeners aren't old enough, but some remember.
Yeah.
Reinvent continuously, continuous improvement,
Yeah.
total quality management. Lots of that was going on in the 80s. And by the way, there was some really good stuff in there.
Yeah,
Really
exactly.
good stuff in there. But we chose reinvent continuously because we think it's the right intent. But it still feels hard to get your head around. And so we said there are 3 primary arenas. The best leaders reinvent themselves. It's self. They reinvent systems and work processes. And they reinvent structure as needed, of course, not just willy-nilly. And so as you think about that, it gives people some hooks to think about, okay, what does this really mean? And I would argue that self-leadership is the hardest leadership of all. But to reinvent yourself may be the most valuable thing of all because the world continues to change. And all of the statistics and my personal experience indicate the world is changing faster. I mean, the pandemic, many people think we accelerated the pre-existing change curves have been accelerated by at least 5 years just because of what's happened in the last 12 months, whether it be technology or work from home or in-home delivery. We were already on those curves, but everything is speeding up. And so leaders that are not mindful to continue to grow and to reinvent themselves, they're going to blink and they're going to be behind. And a story I love to tell about that was from a book I read. It must have been 25, 30 years ago, but if you can find it, I would still recommend it. It's called Barbarians to Bureaucrats by a guy named Lawrence Miller. Okay. And to me, this was just the most fascinating, again, one of the best books I've ever read, because here's what he did. He took Toynbee's research on the rise and fall of 21 civilizations, and he mapped it with corporate life cycles. And it's the same. It's the same. And as it relates to this point of reinvention, he said one of the signals that a civilization was done is when leaders begin to apply the answers from yesterday to today's questions. It's the same true in corporations. It's the same true in our lives. I mean, the world is just moving. Leaders that don't make an intentional commitment to reinvent themselves are forfeiting their leadership.
And so it could be, it may be a self issue. It could be a system issue, or it could be a structure issue.
Well, I think the best leaders are going to do all 3.
They understand
as needed.
Yeah.
But I mean, it starts with self, because if you're not learning and growing,
Yeah.
you're not going to have the mindset to even delve into those other arenas.
So how do you get down the road, at our age, and I've never seen you for a day say I'm where I need to be. I mean, it's like, I've mentioned before, I heard Nick Saban, the Alabama football coach, talk about how his rival is not Auburn or whoever they're playing in the SEC championship game. Their rival is complacency. That's a big idea. It feels like
I think it's twofold.
That's who you're competing against. This idea of complacency.
It's
what
complacency and arrogance.
Yeah,
because to think
good.
you're done is arrogant.
Yeah,
and it's just wrong-headed.
Right.
I mean, I'm pedaling as hard as I can to keep up. I can't imagine how far behind a leader would get if he or she said, "I'm done. I'm not going to learn and grow." It's like, man, you just need to turn in your keys because you're done.
Yeah. So how powerful is it then for the 25-year-old listener or the 30-year-old listener? I told this story a few weeks ago. My father-in-law planted pine trees 30 years ago, and he died 4 years ago, and we harvested those about 6 months ago. So we're still reaping the benefits of things he did 30 years ago. How powerful is that if I'm 25 and I get on this growth track? I mean, it's like there's never too early to start this.
It's hugely powerful. And I've had a recent reminder. Some of your audience knows that I've written a few books, and they've been business fables. They've been parables. Well, I've got a new book that's in the works, and it's the first real book, at least as the publisher calls it.
The other ones are great.
They weren't real. But this is a traditional business book. And let me link it. This isn't a book promo, but I'll link it to what you just said about what happens if you get on this train 20 or 30 years ago. The reason I remember, and this book by Lawrence Miller is top of mind today, as I was writing this book, see, none of the other books had those types of references.
Right, research, whatever.
That kind of stuff. Well, in this book, I'm actually sharing ideas and sharing where the seed of those ideas came from. There are probably 10 books referenced in my new book that I read over the last 40 years. Those are those pine trees. When I read Larry Miller's book 35 years ago, that was a seed in the ground. And I am now today in my book telling everybody and telling your audience you ought to go read it, but I'm going to take that idea in my book and I'm going to expand upon it. And I did that for several resources that they were paint on my palette years ago that I'm painting with today.
Yeah. How amazing is it to just hear from a guy who's been in the same place 4 decades, and yet so many times in that place, as he alluded to, he has reinvented himself over and over again. I love that idea of changing careers, having a hard time holding down a job in the same job or in the same company. That's really cool as you think about that. So a couple of things he talked about there. I want us to use this week to sort of springboard us into this following week, maybe into these next few months, not just this next week, but the next few months. So I have a couple of questions for you. One of those questions is related to questions. Mark referred to it. Are there places in your life where you are being asked questions today in a different way than you've ever been asked before, and you're still trying to apply yesterday's answers to today's questions? I thought that was really good what he talked about there, and Toynbee's idea of I mean, it just puts us into irrelevance if we do. And I heard somebody say one time, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And I don't know about you, but man, the world is changing so fast. Things are going crazy. And yet there's two things I think I need to be thinking about. One is my values. I don't want my values to change. I need to be locked in on those. They become foundational. But I do need to embrace change. I need to lean into it. I need to be willing to find answers, relevant answers to the questions I'm being asked today. And so you're the same way. You've got some questions right now that you're struggling with, you're wrestling with, maybe some things going on around your life, in your environment, in your relationships. Some of the things that maybe even we've been talking about these last few weeks with your fitness, your finances, your friendships, some of those kind of things, your vocation. Is life asking you some questions right now, and you're kind of stuck in, if I just do what I've always done, it's going to work. And it may not. And so I want to really encourage you to take a few minutes when this is over, and just a couple more minutes here, but when we're done, take a few minutes and say, okay, what are some of the questions I'm up against right now? What are some of the struggles that I'm feeling, the challenges that I'm facing, the problems that have popped up? And what am I doing to answer those? Like, what are the right answers to those? Not just what have I always done, but like, what do I really need to do right now? So I think that's a really good question. And then the second thing that I would just encourage you to do this week is to begin thinking about some of those areas in your life where you need a makeover. You need to reinvent yourself, if you will. And so I like that idea of makeover. There's all these makeover shows on TV these days. I think there was I didn't watch it, but I think they had this extreme makeover show. Was that I think that was like your personal look and all that kind of stuff. That was the big deal. I'm looking at my man over here. He's nodding like that's it. But now they have all these what I'll call makeover. They're making over houses these days. I guess they made over people enough, and so now they're making over houses, and people go in and they'll get this house, and my wife and I watch these sometimes. My wife loves this kind of stuff, and so we're watching this show recently where they go in, they buy this old house, and next thing you know, they've renovated the whole thing, and it just looks like a whole new house. Well, as you think about your life, are there some places right now where you need to just tear it to the ground, maybe, and renovate or rebuild, I should say, or are there some places where you just need to knock out a wall or two and renovate, not rebuild, but to renovate? And so I think about my life, there's a place or two right now I'm saying, I really need to do some things differently if I want to get different results. What's the old saying? If you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. I know that's kind of a country boy way of saying that, but I just want to challenge you right now. Are there some places in your life where you've been doing the same thing over and over? Some places in your life, it's great to have routine. It's great to have even ritual. But there are some places in your life that if you don't take a hard look in the mirror and say, this is not the way it should be, I've got to do some things different. It's not going to change. And so how long are you going to, I asked you last week about your food and some of your nutrition choices, but how long are you going to wait and just think, well, someday I'm going to get to that. Someday I'm going to clean out that garage or clean out that room, or I'm going to make this change in a relationship, or I'm going to just fill in your blank. And yet someday, the crazy thing about someday, it just never comes. It's never going to be someday. It's always going to be today. So what are you going to do to put your feet down today and say, I'm going to be planted right here. I'm going to make this change, and I'm going to start taking a step. Again, not going to change my values. My values are going to give me something to anchor to in the midst of the chaos that's about to come when I make this reinventive change. But I love what Mark shared there. I can't use yesterday's answers for today's questions, and I need to be a person who is continually reinventing, or I just become, as he said, really irrelevant. And so that's my challenge for you this week. Pick one spot, reinvent, remodel, or renovate, whatever you need to do. Maybe you need to totally rebuild. I don't know. You probably know better than I do, but I want to encourage you to do that, because if you really want to be great, if you want to chase greatness, it's a never-ending quest. And as I shared at the beginning, it's quantuvus. It literally is as great as you choose. You get to choose. Make the choice today to be great. And if you'll reinvent in that area, this is going to be a really great week for you. So let's just get started. Let's take a baby step. We'll be closer to where we want to be next week. We got a really cool something coming up next week. So join us again next week for Chasing Greatness. I hope you'll, again, push this out, help us spread the word. Appreciate all you're doing. Leave a comment below as well. If you got some thoughts on this, some areas maybe where you're reinventing, love to see those in the comments. We love reading those comments you send every week. And if you got questions or anything we can help you with, please let us know. Till next week, keep chasing greatness.